For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. It's a fairly complex day, really, as far as Asia-Pacific is concerned as we start this new week. Let me take you through the details. Mainland China market's fairly mixed today. The Hang Seng was down about 0.5%. The reason for all that, and Japan was up as well, increased by 1.02%. Basically, all this is around China's consumer and factory data, which missed expectations in July. It still appears as though retail confidence is consumer confidence rather, is relatively low within the country. And even though there's been a strong recovery in exports as far as China's concerned, the imports not doing too well, and it's really how the economy there is attempting to get to terms with this zero COVID policy. So there are probably still lockdowns to come. Meanwhile, the People's Bank of China reduced medium-term lending by about 0.1% to 2.75%, and get this one, the 7-day reversed repo rate down to 2.1%. I mean, all these things are basically about the cost of money that banks are charged for borrowing it in the first place from the central bank. Retail sales still growing very, very slight, but only very, very, very slightly. Investment into real estate fell at a faster pace in July than June. Now, we've been talking about this. I was saying on Friday how a lot of that lack of activity may well spill over into other sectors. This is a bit of a mix, really. We used to talk about when during the apartheid days, when oil was imported via Beira into South Africa. We used to call it sanction busting. So hence the headline about sanction busting. There's lots of different ways. The missiles used in a chip plant by Nexperia, which is a Chinese company, attempting to buy a Newport wafer fab in North Wales. Now they've found actually some of the components from that in missiles used by Russia, and so it goes on. There is a mixture of Putin oil shipped to the UK in a blend of Exxon, which is called the CPC blend. Business as usual is tending to service this war rather than complete sanctions. And the United States has expressed concern to India, for example, about the cheap fuel that they've been buying, or the cheap oil that they've been buying from the UK. The US Treasury Department said that they had noticed that India had an Indian ship picked up oil from a Russian tanker on the high seas, and so it goes on. Staying with oil, Saudi Aramco profit blew everybody away. Extraordinary, and stunning 90% increase in profits from oil as well. Historic windfalls and all the rest of it. I don't need to go to the details. Actually massive. And meanwhile, the United States is on Friday. Now, the Chinese president is actually going to Saudi Arabia. The US are very, very keen to stress that this is not a sign of them losing influence in the region. I leave you to make your own guesses about that. Russia is reopening its bond market, but to non-hostile investors, it's called. I mean, this will help it very, very slightly in terms of government spending and so on. In a statement, now this was in Russian, and again, sometimes the translation's a bit difficult, but the Moscow Exchange said it would be reopening its bond markets to non-resident clients from countries that are not hostile, as well as non-residents whose ultimate beneficiaries are Russian legal entities or individuals. So that's the bond market opening again in Moscow. As far as the United States is concerned, last week was a relatively good week for inflation numbers, both wholesale and retail, as we covered then. How will that actually go into this coming week? Well, again, we'll have to see what the markets actually say. But most Americans themselves are feeling that we might have reached peak inflation. Who knows? How would they know? I don't know. But anyway, that's what they were surveyed, and that's what they've actually said. Elon Musk is saying that he's delivered 3 million Tesla cars. He's congratulating his Shanghai factory on achieving that kind of level. Total Teslas made now over 3 million is what he actually said. And this is after all the lockdowns in China and so on, and suggests that Tesla Shanghai factory is producing a significant number of new vehicles after opening in 2019 and subsequent years of investment. Turning to the UK leadership battle, Liz Truss, for number one, is not saying now that she's going to split the Treasury, the UK finance department into two arms, economic and finance. She's saying that she wants to make number 10, i.e. her official residence in the centre of London, this sort of economic powerhouse. And most people are thinking that Kwasi Kwarteng, who is now business secretary, will become finance minister, treasury, chancellor under her. For Sunak is now saying that the energy crisis is now a national emergency, and some analysts are pointing to annual bills of £5,000 coming up as electricity generators have reaped much higher revenues without seeing their cost rising. I suspect there's going to be more from the Sunak camp about that today. Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, has called for tax on oil companies, international oil companies. Not really sure how that would go down in the United States. And also, the majority of the big oil and gas companies don't make the majority of their profits in the UK. So we'll see how that actually works. He's talking about trying to save an annual amount of about £1,000 a year. Again, all to be debated. And where's the money going to come from? All the usual questions that we always get about political promises. A slightly more real point about this is that after Brexit and after the problems facing this country, the wages are not attracting people from abroad, and thus hospitality, corporate, and in particular transport industries are finding that they're not getting the staff that they require. And finally, I just want to keep going with oil. Again, not on a day-to-day basis, but a general observation. It's below $100 a barrel, generally speaking, over the weekend. And this is on fear of the global recession, which are not going away. That is the global view.
All right, Michael, good morning again. But I'd like to ask, why is it that you don't have enough wages? Because I thought a lot of people were not coming to work. And by my basic economic thinking, people push up wages when you don't have enough workers to be able to attract people to come in. And that's why you saw that wage has increased in America, has increased in other parts of the world. Why is it different in the UK? Because Andrew Bailey was complaining just the other day that a lot of people are not actually going to work. Yeah, there's a problem of skills, but also because people are just lazy because they still have a lot of the furlough money in there. But wages on the increase to be able to attract people. So why are people not coming in? That's one. Number two.
I think what people are saying is that they're not. I mean, there's very, very moving parts of this story. First of all, people are not necessarily going back to the office. It doesn't necessarily they're not doing work. They may well be working from home. That's a bit of a grey area and will continue. I think the idea of hybrid working is going to continue. I think that certainly skills are not being taught. In particular, for example, I can go to transport for you and say that actually there are no apprenticeships in transport out of further education or in place of further education in the UK. We depended a great deal on people. You can't just have people driving lorries. They've got to be trained. Lorries and buses, they have to be trained. They've got to be over 21 and all these kind of things which are gradually being sort of pushed through. Maybe these kind of things will change. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there is a level of long-term unemployed in this country, and they're not going back to work. And the basic problem is that employers cannot afford to pay the kind of wages to attract them. Now, again, we puzzle about that, don't we? Some of us have been working most of our working lives not necessarily getting perhaps what we feel we deserve, or perhaps what employers can actually pay. But that's life, really, and I think it will continue. I feel and it's not. I said it was a post-Brexit thing. I said post. I don't think it actually depends on Brexit. I think it would have happened in any case. I feel as though there are all sorts of labour shortages all the way around Europe, perhaps in Nigeria as well, for all I know. I don't know. You obviously know more about that than I do. But in terms of actually fitting skilled people into the kind of jobs that actually make the money, and artificial intelligence and corporate backup and all the rest of it, there's certainly a big. I'm not just talking about fruit pickers. I'm talking about people with certain kind of skills, doctors, nurses, and the rest of it, who are just not matched to the jobs in any particular country. I think it's a worldwide phenomenon. Not excusing what's happening in the UK. It's probably worse here. But that goes back to years of underinvestment and people not putting education first, which one should always do.
Okay, so it's sort of like Schumpeterian in nature, if I get what you're saying. I think, we need to study this phenomenon, really. Secondly, I'd like to ask, is it... Okay, Tunda, I'll come over to you here.
I wanted your thoughts, Michael, on Keir Starmer's proposal, saying that not a single penny more will be paid for energy as opposed to the £3,500 increase that was expected. I'm sure that will appeal to your average voter. However, Liz Truss's team has dismissed it as pure socialism. Where do you stand on this issue?
Well, I mean, it is socialism. I'd very much like to hear the detail of what Sir Keir Starmer is actually proposing. I've only got some very broad figures because that's all we have at the moment. But the socialism, I mean, we've sort of moved into that kind of stage where we are attempting to distribute the riches of the country, but not necessarily to the poorest. I mean, that really is the key to it. But I think his proposal to tax oil and gas companies is not actually very real, because that's not going to. How on earth do you tax BP in other countries outside Britain? We wouldn't allow countries outside Britain to tax companies and to interfere with the tax system here. They've got to be taxed at base. I don't really understand how that works. And also, I mean, as far as economic literacy is concerned, the big companies don't make the majority of their profits in the UK. I still think what is going to happen, though, and there's a lot of mileage here, is between the windfall profits that the electricity companies, this includes the generators and the suppliers, are making without any perceived decrease in their revenue, without cost to themselves. Now, that gap, I feel, is what politicians should be looking at if they're going to be talking about making sure that we don't have a cold winter. I think that's it. I don't think this overall taxation thing works properly, but it does if you go to the generating companies and say, look, you're charging this, we know what your costs are, why is there a gap? Why is that not being redistributed and saving energy bills? That's the way I would go if you want to ask my opinion about it.
Okay, Michael, Aramco profits surging high like many other energy oil majors around the world. Makes some of us feel nostalgic about what state-owned oil companies in our own clime suddenly turned now limited liability company are not doing right. But my question really is still on this socialism thing, whether you call it socialism or not. The people of UK are saying there has to be something to be done about the cost of living crisis. Now, Keir Starmer's proposal that he will set out 29 billion pounds to freeze bills for 6 months looks interesting, and the Times is reporting that 3 in 4 Tory voters are backing Labour's energy plan. Any chance of the Tories adopting such a plan?
Yes, I mean, I put the question straight back to you. So what do you think? What do you think politicians would do if you notice that 3 out of 4 of your voters actually believe you ought to do something? What would politicians do? Whether it be sensible or not, I suspect that politicians would probably go down that path. And I think this whole thing, this whole discussion has got a long way to go. And however, that we can throw these figures of, was it 29 billion around and the 30 billion already, 37 billion pounds of support that the government says. I mean, these are just figures, aren't they? I think, though, if there is a majority of people in this country, conservative voters mainly, headlined by this story, saying we need to do something about the energy crisis and the cost of living crisis, it will be done. There will be something in something falling out of all this discussion before whoever it is sets foot in number 10. You can be sure of that. It's what politicians do.
Well, thank you, Michael. Moving on to business update across the African continent, Rotis Odiri joins us. Good morning.
Good morning, Tundu. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Mr. Ifeni. Good morning to all our viewers. We'll begin with the ports. Have the ports been improved over the last 7 years? Can anyone? Yeah? No? We've had issues with the ports. So
I saw the debate. I doubt it.
You doubt. All right. So we had a representative, actually a spokesperson from Customs, who said that, listen, we've updated our systems, we're using ICT, and basically it's bad roads leading up to the ports and other agencies that have been causing this matter. Let's take an excerpt from our interview we had on Friday.
Following concession of the ports, there was no provision for an export examination terminal within the ports. So exports were before now being remotely examined either in the premises of the exporter or in designated areas, both by our officers and pre-shipment inspection agents. Today, fortunately, I think they've come up with a solution where exports can be aggregated at a particular point. I think recently Lily Pond terminal was approved for that exercise, and after which they will now be allowed access into the ports for onward movement to their various destinations. Now again, we have to emphasize this point. It has nothing to do with the operations of customs, because customs operation is very simple. You focus on the declaration, you focus on certifying all the requirements necessary for export of those goods, and then these things are sealed and taken out of the country. But it is one thing to examine containers remotely. It is another thing to have these containers move into the port premises because of the congestion on the roads. And it can take upwards of 2 to 3 weeks after customs may have carried out these exercises for these containers to actually get into the port. And that is where the problem lies. Right. That is what needs to be addressed. As it concerns other government agencies, we do know that we have provided links for all these agencies, and we've encouraged them to step up their game in terms of their ICT infrastructure, because the world has gone digital. We can't afford to be, using manual processes for things that ought to be automated. And we've told them that the Nigerian Customs Service is always ready to work with them to achieve this goal. Recently, Standard Organizations of Nigeria came, they visited the Controller General of Customs, and they promised that they were going to, work on their ICT infrastructure and even bring in customs officers in the use of this infrastructure, to train their officers in the use of this infrastructure. We encourage other government agencies to do the same. We are only one in a chain, and we know that a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And we encourage all of these other links to be as strong as the link of the customs. That is the only way we can be competitive. That is the only way our ports can be efficient, and we can begin to see less incidents of demorages and other, costs that do not need to be incurred by businesses in the country.
All right. So, again, we're having this conversation in August of 2022. That is something that needs to be noted. You just heard what Michael Wilson said about education a few minutes ago, where he said that governments need to prioritize education and make it a top priority. And that was just with regards to what you were talking about. Let's apply it here. So on Friday, the federal government inaugurated a new committee. Oh, yeah. Yeah, a new one. A new committee. This is to review the integrated payroll and personal information system. There's been a back and forth between the IPPIS and UTAS, which is the University Transparency and Accountability Solution. This has been, causing a number of issues. Issa Pantami, Dr. Issa Pantami, Minister of ICT Minister, Digital Economy Minister, inaugurated that committee. Again, the schools have been out for months now, on and off for years. You've got the little ecosystems around the schools that depend on the students for buying, provisions, food, clothing, and so on. Those have been impacted as well. You've got the students whose pathway to employment, there's no jobs when they come out, but pathway to employment, that's been impacted. There's also a need to discuss the funding issue with public universities in this country, where they depend so much on governments. What about grants? What about, research studies and so on? Endowment funds, thank you, sir, and so much. But again, 7 years in, we are discussing ports, and we are still discussing education. Finally, Kenya, 65% of the votes are in. Apparently, Mr. William Ruto has now edged ahead. Earlier, he had his unofficial results now. This is coming from the National Media Group based in Nairobi. They're saying that they're getting data from the Electoral Commission. Ruto up 52.5% to Odinga's 46.9%, 65% of votes in. Now remember, we talked about this. They started voting on the 9th. 7 days is when they had the limit through which they have to basically declare the winner of this election. So we have to find out the winner by the end of tomorrow. So we will see how that goes. It's down to the wire.
Okay, so concerning the results, I think let's wait till the end, because we normally know how Kenya elections are. But when you look at the reportage, media affiliations are skewed. So some media outlets are taking a lot of reports from, the Form 34A of the heartland of Ruto, for instance.
Right.
So some are reporting that. I think Citizen 2 is reporting a lot of that, I think NTV in Kenya too is reporting a lot of that. But when you look at K25 and the likes, some are taking majorly from the heartland of Odinga.
Yeah.
But I think the deciding factor in Kenya elections has always been the Mount Kenya region. That's where the chunk of the votes come in. So I think when the Mount Kenya region votes come in, we'll be able to see how the elections will pan out. But it's really neck and neck, and it's going to be down to the wire. Yesterday, one of the candidates, accepted defeat, one of the lower candidates, not to Wachoga, the guy after...
Yeah, the guy who wants to export hyena meats.
Yeah, not that guy, the guy after that one.
Oh, okay, the pastor, the pastor, yeah.
So he said he's leaning towards Ruto, so let's see, how that pans out. But about 41, they've got 46,000 polling units.
Yeah.
About 43,000 have been counted now. Let's see how that pans out. Concerning education, I thought NICTA had checked it. And you know why I was taken aback when they set up a committee? When we don't want to do something, we set up a committee to review what the other committee has done.
Yeah.
We should be able to do this. Issa Pantami, I hope you know, was formerly in charge of NICTA.
He was?
NICTA had reviewed this. I thought they had released the report. So why are you setting the committee to review the report again? And if it's not good enough, why can't you tell them, okay, improve the tech, improve this, improve all of this? It's technological handshake. And why can't even NICTA work with ASU on this? Voila, problem solved.
7 years.
No, apparently not, because ASU is insisting on UTAS. They don't want IPIS. And, recent events have sort of borne out their hesitation.
I thought we want peace. If we want peace, and ASU is on UTAS...
Peace at any cost. It's no
Okay.
peace at all. So this is why. But yes, the tedium, I think that might be a theme this morning. Tedium,
Right.
talking about the same thing constantly, like you mentioned about the ports. Thank you for that perspective. We've talked about this for years, education. Banging on about the same thing for years. Our guest later on is going to be talking about why we can't get the power sector right. It's just tedium after yes.
Yeah,
so the tedium is just constant. So
Yeah.
with ASU is insisting on the peculiarities of their profession with regards to IPIS and why it just will not work. So I don't see what this committee will do. I am actually not averse to committees, because if we are going to be governed by the rule of law, you cannot rule or govern by fiat. You do have to have committees, but for goodness sake, let them be effective and quick, and not have a committee review the work, like you just said, of another committee. That's when you start getting into, completely ridiculous territory here. And the whole time Nigerian students are at home, it's really just so unfair, because it doesn't look to me like there's any seriousness at this point. This committee, I fail to see what the point is. I really do. And with regards to the ports, that clip that you just shared is so important, because it shows the importance of agencies working in concert. And actually what we have now is more of a case of them frustrating one another. And that's extremely important to note.
Indeed. Mr. Ifini?
Yes, let's start with ASU.
Right.
It's taking the government this long to come up with a committee to review IPIS. As for the UTAS, which the university teachers are saying they have come up with their own software, which they believe is better, will give them what they want. The problem there is that, don't forget, there are other unions in the university system. This is only for us. The Senior Staff Association also say they're also working on something. Then when the junior staff will come up with their own. So how many systems are you going to use to pay university employees, whether you're a lecturer, senior lecturer, or a junior worker, senior staff, non-academic staff, or junior non-academic staff? How many systems are you going to use? Now, as for the test, yes, UTAS was said to have passed almost 95%, but a critical aspect, 5%, they said had some issues. But you see, this committee, this government has set up now, some of us suggested this long ago, that if there's a problem with a software developed by somebody, or a group of persons, by a company, if there are shortcomings, that same company can review that software and take into consideration the concerns of one and all. That was not done all this while. After 6 months in this stretch of strike, the other time, one academic session lost because of IPs. Now this government has set up a committee to review IPs, IPPS. What a way to solve problems. Is the government really interested in solving this problem? Or they just want to
kick the can down the road?
No, that's what I'm looking at in this face.
That's my favorite expression.
Can down the road.
Kick it down
It's one of my
down.
favorite expressions here.
So
yes.
you've kicked subsidy down the road
thank you.
till May 29.
Yeah.
Perhaps you set up another committee to review this committee.
Or sign reports.
You review
that one. Yeah.
Kicking the can.
Yeah.
Restructuring.
Restructuring.
Yes.
Kicking it down the road, right?
So how government should not solve problems.
Yeah.
Perhaps
case study.
Yes, a case study.
University case study. Excuse the
Yes,
pun. Yeah.
yes. The ports, the transportation system, the roads.
Right.
Although that road is being done now with concrete, I hope that will improve, because part of the problem also has to be the chaotic nature of.
Stephanie, in 7 years?
Yes,
7
that
years.
is
They
the
haven't been able to
problem.
fix that road.
No, but
in
remember
7
the
years.
presidential task force,
No.
marching orders, and what
Yes.
have you. All
Rotus,
to no avail.
I just give you one example and then shock you. Now, the Apapa port is at number 1 Creek Road. This is the headquarters, 35 Creek Road. We once imported some things, coincidentally for a rise.
Yeah.
It was cleared at the port. It took 4 days to get to this day. From
35.
number 1
To number
Creek Road
35.
to number 35.
You see, like-
It took 4 days.
Yeah.
You can't make it up.
The ports are working. The ports are working.
See,
It took 4 days.
Yes.
Just to carry it from one place
Yes.
to the other on the same street, I'm sure. 4 days.
Yes.
Nigeria ports are working.
So I hope things are improving, if they are saying so.
Gosh.
You know, I have not been in Apapa in a long while.
I don't blame you. I wouldn't be in Apapa for a long while
When
either.
I tell you I watch your debate and I laugh, you see why I'm laughing.